canine German Shepherd fought for days to survive, and the last person he expected came to save him. A loyal canine officer, abandoned and left to die, spent days fighting for his life. No backup, no help, just sheer willpower keeping him alive. But just when all hope seemed lost, someone completely unexpected appeared and changed everything. A story of survival, second chances, and the unbreakable spirit of a true hero. Stay with us until the end, because this is a story you will never forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to life. The rain poured relentlessly over the empty lot where Rex, a once proud canine officer, lay motionless in the mud. His body was battered, his fur matted with blood and dirt. He had been fighting for days. Alone, discarded, left behind. His ribs ached with every shallow breath, and the deep gash on his hind leg throbbed. He had fought as hard as he could, but his strength was fading. No food, no water, no handler. Where was his team? Where was the man he had trusted with his life? The last memory before the world had gone dark was the mission. The gunfire, the explosion, the chaos of the chase, and then pain. He had tried to get back to them, back to the people he had served so loyally. But when he collapsed, no one came. And now he was barely hanging on. The city was distant, the towering skyline barely visible through the storm. Cars rushed past on the highway nearby, their drivers unaware that a hero was dying just a few feet away. Rex's ears twitched. He could still hear everything. The hum of traffic, the splatter of rain against the pavement. And footsteps, slow, hesitant footsteps. Someone was approaching. His instincts screamed at him to get up, to be ready to defend himself, but his body refused to move. He could only lie there, helpless, as the shadow drew closer. Then, a voice, soft, uncertain. "Oh my God." The scent was unfamiliar. Not a cop, not military, a stranger. Rex forced his eyes open, blinking against the rain. The figure above him was blurry at first, but as they knelt down beside him, he could see more clearly. It was a young man, not in uniform, no badge, no gun, just wide, concerned eyes, and a hoodie soaked from the rain. Rex didn't understand. Where were his officers? His team? Why was it this man here? The stranger hesitated before reaching out a hand. "You're still alive," he whispered. "I don't know how, but you're still alive." Rex tensed. He didn't trust easily. He had learned the hard way that not all humans were kind. But right now, he had two choices. Take a chance on this stranger, or die here alone. With the last of his strength, he let out a soft whimper. The man's face changed. It wasn't just concern anymore. It was determination. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "I don't know who left you here, but I'm not leaving you." Then, before Rex could even process what was happening, the stranger lifted him into his arms. And for the first time in days, Rex wasn't alone. Rex felt his body lifted from the cold, wet ground, but he had no strength left to resist. Every muscle ached. Every wound screamed in pain. But the warmth of the stranger's arms was something he hadn't felt in days. Why was this man helping him? The rain poured harder as the young man carried Rex toward the street, his hoodie soaked, his breathing heavy from the effort. He wasn't a cop, wasn't military. He was just some guy, a nobody. But he was here. And right now, he was the only chance Rex had. "I don't know how you're still alive, man," the stranger muttered under his breath, adjusting his grip as he staggered toward an old truck parked at the curb. "But I swear I won't let you die." Rex barely registered the words. His head lolled against the man's chest, his heartbeat faint. Too weak to move, too weak to fight. The stranger yanked open the truck's door and carefully laid Rex across the passenger seat. His hands were gentle, careful not to touch the worst of the wounds. Then, he stepped back and stared. For a long moment, the man just looked at him, like he was trying to understand how a dog like Rex ended up here. Rex blinked, struggling to keep his eyes open. His body shivered from exhaustion, but he forced himself to watch this human. "Who are you?" The man exhaled, wiping rain from his face before getting into the driver's seat. The truck rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the storm. As they pulled onto the road, he finally spoke again. "My name's Caleb," he said, glancing at Rex. "I don't know if you can hear me, but you're safe now." Safe. Rex had almost forgotten what that word meant. The drive was quiet, except for the occasional rattling of the old truck. Caleb kept stealing glances at Rex, his brows furrowed in concern. "I've seen stray dogs before," he murmured, mostly to himself. "But you're not a stray, are you?" Rex's ears twitched. "No collar, no tag," Caleb continued, shaking his head. "But you're trained, I can tell." Rex didn't move, but deep down he knew Caleb was right. He wasn't just any dog, he was a canine, a warrior, a protector, and yet his team had left him behind. Why? His body shuddered, his mind clouded with exhaustion. The last thing he remembered was the mission, the chase, the gunfire, the explosion. Then, darkness. Had they assumed he was dead? Or had they simply moved on without him? The thought sent a dull ache through his chest. Caleb pulled off the road into a small driveway. The house was nothing fancy, just a modest cabin tucked between tall trees, a warm glow coming from the porch light. He put the truck in park and turned to Rex. "I don't know what happened to you," he admitted, "but I do know one thing." Rex's eyes flickered open. "I'm not letting you die tonight." Inside, the house smelled of wood and something faintly like coffee. The warmth hit Rex's fur immediately, making his exhausted body feel heavier. Caleb moved quickly, grabbing a stack of towels before kneeling beside Rex on the floor. "All right, buddy, let's see what we're dealing with." He started carefully wiping away the mud and blood, his movements slow and deliberate. Rex flinched at first, but Caleb didn't stop. His hands weren't like the ones Rex had known before. They weren't rough like a handler's grip. They weren't demanding, weren't issuing commands. They were kind. "Jesus," Caleb muttered under his breath as he examined Rex's injuries. His fingers hovered over the deep gash on Rex's hind leg. "Whoever left you out there, they just let you suffer." Rex swallowed back a whimper. He had suffered, but he was still here. Caleb worked in silence, cleaning the wounds, dressing them the best he could. He didn't hesitate, didn't stop, and Rex let him. When it was finally done, Caleb leaned back on his heels, exhaling. "You're gonna need real vet care, man, but for now, this will do." He stood up, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know why I picked you up." His voice was quiet. "I barely have enough to take care of myself, let alone a half-dead police dog." Rex watched him. Caleb shook his head, letting out a dry laugh. "But I couldn't just leave you." He looked down at Rex again, his expression unreadable. "I don't think you're used to needing help," he said softly. "But you do now." Rex blinked. Was that true? Had he ever needed anyone? He had spent his whole life protecting others. But now, he was the one being saved. As exhaustion pulled him under, Rex made one last quiet decision. For now, he would trust Caleb, at least until he was strong enough to find out why his team had left him behind. The morning came slowly, light filtering through the cabin windows, casting soft shadows on the wooden floors. Rex's body was aching, but alive. For the first time in days, he felt warmth. He blinked, trying to adjust to his surroundings. The air smelled different: wood, coffee, something faintly like soap. It was nothing like the police kennels he had once known. The police, his team. A growl rumbled deep in his throat as memories surfaced. The mission, the chase, the explosion. Then, nothing. He had fought. He had survived. But they had left him. Rex shifted slightly, testing his legs. Pain shot through his body. He wasn't ready to move yet. But he would be. He had to be. A sound caught his attention, the shuffle of feet on the floor. The stranger, Caleb. Rex's ears twitched as he watched the man move around the small kitchen. Caleb's back was turned, his hoodie from last night replaced by a simple t-shirt. He looked tired. His hair was a mess. And there were dark circles under his eyes, but still he was here. Rex didn't understand. Why was this man helping him? Caleb poured coffee into a mug, then turned, finally noticing Rex was awake. "Oh, hey," he said, walking toward him. "You made it through the night. That's a good start." Rex just stared. Caleb knelt down, resting his elbows on his knees. "All right, buddy. Let's have a talk." Rex's ears flicked. Caleb sighed. "I don't know where you came from, but I know you didn't end up in that lot by accident." He nodded toward the faint scars beneath Rex's matted fur. "You were trained. You've seen combat. And someone who should have protected you, left you to die." Rex's muscles tensed. He knew. Caleb exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I tried calling the local shelters this morning. No reports of a missing German Shepherd." He hesitated. "I even called a couple of police stations." Rex's breath hitched. "They acted weird when I asked about a missing canine." Caleb's brows furrowed. "They said all their units were accounted for." Silent. Caleb let the words sink in before shaking his head. "They're lying." Rex's stomach twisted. He had served his handlers loyally, trained to protect, to chase, to fight. But when he had fallen, they had covered it up. They had erased him. Caleb leaned forward. "I don't know what happened to you, but I do know one thing." His voice softened. "You weren't just abandoned. You were erased on purpose." Rex's heart pounded. He didn't know why, but suddenly, he trusted this man. Not as a handler, not as an officer, but as something else. A partner. Caleb sighed, reaching out slowly. "Look, I don't know if you're sticking around, but if you do, we'll figure this out. You and me." Rex stared at him. Then, for the first time, he made the choice. He lifted his paw and placed it in Caleb's hand. Caleb stared at the paw resting in his hand. It wasn't just a sign of trust. It was a choice. Rex had spent his life following orders, obeying commands. But this was different. This time, he was choosing Caleb. The weight of that moment settled in Caleb's chest. He gave a slow nod, squeezing Rex's paw gently before letting go. "All right," he murmured. "We'll figure this out. Together." Rex blinked, his amber eyes steady. He believed him. But beneath the quiet trust, Caleb could see something else. Rex wanted answers, and so did he. Later that day, Caleb sat on the couch, his laptop balanced on his knee. Rex lay on the floor beside him, his ears flicking toward every little sound. He wasn't fully relaxed. Not yet. Caleb had spent the last hour digging through local police reports, searching for any mention of a missing canine. But just like before, there was nothing. No lost dogs, no reports of an injured canine unit, no mention of Rex at all. It was like he had never existed. Caleb exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. Something wasn't right. Rex wasn't some stray who had wandered off. Someone wanted him forgotten. A thought hit him. What if I search for missing officers instead? He adjusted the laptop, fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. If Rex had been abandoned, maybe it was because something had happened to his handler. The search results loaded. And that's when he saw it. A news article. Caleb's pulse quickened as he clicked on the link. The headline made his stomach drop. Officer killed in undercover raid. Details remain classified. The photo beneath it showed a man in a police K9 unit uniform, and standing beside him was Rex. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. "This is you," he whispered, his eyes darting toward Rex. The dog lifted his head at the sound of Caleb's voice, his ears twitching. Caleb turned back to the screen. The article was brief. Too brief. It mentioned that the officer had been working undercover during a high-risk operation, but the details were sealed. No mention of how he died. No mention of what happened to his K9 partner. No mention of Rex at all. His chest tightened. They erased him. When his handler died, they must have decided Rex wasn't worth saving. Maybe they thought he was too injured. Maybe they didn't want to deal with a retired K9. Maybe someone wanted him gone. Caleb clenched his jaw. Whatever the reason was, they had left him to die, and Rex had spent days fighting for a life that had already been thrown away. Caleb looked at him, his voice tight. "They didn't even put your name in here." Rex didn't, Yusuf, but his eyes, they knew. They understood. He had been a soldier, a protector, a hero. And his reward? Being erased. Caleb's fingers curled into fists. He wasn't okay with that. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't military. He was just a guy who had found a dying dog in the rain. But now? This was personal. Caleb looked at Rex, determination hardening his voice. "They left you behind," he said. "But I won't." Rex held his gaze, and in that silent moment, Caleb knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. Caleb couldn't shake the anger bubbling inside him. Rex had been erased, not retired, not reassigned. Erased, and that didn't happen by accident. Someone had made the decision to leave him behind. Someone had chosen to let a hero die alone in the rain. Caleb clenched his jaw, his eyes flicking to Rex. The dog sat beside him, ears forward, amber eyes locked on the laptop screen. Did he remember? Did he know that his handler was gone? Something told Caleb that he did. A K9 never forgets his partner. Caleb took a deep breath and kept digging. If Rex's handler had died during an undercover raid, there had to be more. Something the police weren't saying. He searched for any follow-ups, any internal investigations, but every article he found was short, vague, too vague. The kind of wording used when someone wanted to keep people from asking questions. But then, something stood out. A name. Sergeant Tom Briggs. His name appeared in multiple articles. First as one of the officers involved in the raid, then later in a promotion announcement, just weeks after the operation where Rex's handler had been killed. That wasn't unusual. Promotions happened, but something about it felt off. Caleb clicked through another article, and another, and then he saw it. An old photo of Sergeant Briggs smiling in uniform, and standing right behind him was Rex's handler. A chill ran down Caleb's spine. They knew each other. His heart pounded. Was this just a coincidence, or? He turned to Rex, the words barely above a whisper. Was it an accident? Rex's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and in that moment, Caleb saw something in his eyes. Something dark. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Caleb's stomach twisted. Rex knew something. Something the police had buried. The nightmare in his mind. Rex's breath quickened. Flashes of memory hit him like lightning. The mission, the chase, the gunfire. And then, the moment everything changed. He had been running beside his handler, locked onto the target, a man with a gun, a suspect they had been tracking for weeks. His handler had shouted a command. Rex had lunged. Then came the explosion. The blast had sent them both flying. The world had turned upside down in chaos. His ears had rung, his body in pain. But he had pushed forward. He had fought to get up, to keep going. And then he had seen Briggs standing over his handler, gun in hand. And for the first time, Rex had felt a different kind of fear. Not from the enemy, but from his own team. Something had happened that night, something wrong, and Rex had seen it. That's why they erased him. Not because he was injured, not because he was lost, but because he knew too much. The realization. Caleb's pulse pounded as he watched Rex's reaction, the way his breathing had changed, the way his muscles had tensed, the way his eyes, filled with ancient understanding, told a story Caleb wasn't sure he wanted to hear. But he couldn't stop now. He grabbed his phone and started searching for Sergeant Briggs. If he was involved in whatever happened that night, then his heart stopped. Briggs wasn't just an officer anymore. He was now chief of police. Caleb exhaled sharply, his grip tightening around his phone. Of course, the same man who had been there the night Rex's handler died was now running the department. No wonder the records were erased. No wonder no one reported a missing canine. Briggs had made sure of it. Caleb turned to Rex, his voice low. They didn't just leave you behind. He swallowed hard. They made sure you wouldn't come back. Rex let out a slow, deep growl. Not at Caleb. At the name. At the memory. They both knew it now. Rex had been betrayed. And if Briggs thought he had gotten away with it, he was wrong. Caleb's hands trembled as he set his phone down, his mind racing. Chief Tom Briggs, the same officer who had been there the night Rex's handler was killed, the same man who had been promoted right after, the man who now ran the entire department, and the man who had made sure Rex was erased. Rex hadn't been abandoned by accident. He had been silenced. The weight of that realization pressed against Caleb's chest. He looked down at the German Shepherd lying beside him. Rex's muscles were tense, his body coiled like a spring. He had been fighting for days, not just for survival, but for this moment, for someone to finally put the pieces together. You saw it, didn't you? Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. Rex's amber eyes locked onto his. He didn't move, didn't blink, but Caleb understood. He remembered everything. Caleb swallowed hard, rubbing his face with both hands. He had never been the kind of guy to get involved in things like this. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a journalist. He was just a guy who had found a half-dead dog in the rain. But now, he knew too much to walk away. He picked up his laptop again and started digging. He searched through every news article, every press release from the department. Briggs had covered his tracks well. There was no investigation into the raid that had killed Rex's handler, no follow-up on what went wrong. Just a vague statement that the officer had died in an unfortunate accident during an undercover operation. No names of suspects, no official reports released to the public. It was a dead end. But Caleb wasn't looking for what was there. He was looking for what was missing. And then, he found it. A body camera report. His heart pounded as he scrolled through the list of footage logs. Most were accounted for. But the video from Rex's handler's body cam that night? It was gone. Deleted. Caleb exhaled sharply. That wasn't an accident. Someone had intentionally wiped the footage, ensuring that whatever happened that night would never come to light. But if Briggs had gone through the trouble of erasing the evidence, that meant it had to be damning. He sat back, staring at the screen, his pulse hammering in his ears. He couldn't go to the police. Briggs was the police. Reporting this through official channels would only get Rex killed for real this time. No. If they were going to expose the truth, they needed to be smart. He turned to Rex, who was still watching him with those unwavering eyes. We need proof, Caleb murmured. Something they couldn't erase. His mind raced. The department may have deleted the footage, but someone else had been there that night. Other officers, other witnesses. Or maybe Caleb's eyes widened as an idea struck him. Rex's handler had been undercover, which meant he wasn't working alone. There had to be someone else who knew the truth. He turned back to his laptop, this time searching not for cops, but for informants. If Rex's handler had been working a case, he had to have contacts. Someone he had been meeting, someone who might have seen what happened. Scrolling through old arrest records, Caleb's eyes landed on a name. Mason Torres. A former gang member turned informant. Arrested a year ago, but then suddenly released just weeks before the raid that killed Rex's handler. His heart raced. That wasn't a coincidence. If Mason had been working with Rex's handler, he might have been the last person to see him alive. And if Briggs had covered up a murder, Mason might have run for his life. Caleb clenched his jaw. He needed to find him. He grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking as he typed in the name. No recent arrests, no known location. Off the grid. But if he was hiding, that meant he was hiding from someone. Caleb's chest tightened. What if Briggs was already looking for him? What if he was too late? Rex let out a low growl, snapping Caleb out of his thoughts. He looked down. Rex was on edge, his ears perked, his body rigid. Then Caleb heard it too. A car, pulling into the driveway. His breath caught in his throat. No one was supposed to be here. No one even knew where he lived. He quickly shut his laptop and stood up, heart pounding. He peered out the window. A black sedan idled outside. Unmarked. Tinted windows. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't an accident. A shadow moved inside the car. Someone was watching. Caleb's stomach dropped. They knew. Someone, maybe Briggs himself, had realized Rex wasn't dead, and now they were here to fix that mistake. He turned to Rex. The dog's entire body was tense, his fur bristling. He was ready to fight. Caleb's pulse pounded as he whispered, "We need to get out of here now." Rex didn't hesitate. He moved. So did Caleb. They had just become targets, and now it was a race against time. Caleb's hands were shaking as he reached for his truck keys. His pulse pounded in his ears. The unmarked sedan was still outside, its engine running, headlights off. Someone was watching. Someone who knew. Rex stood beside him, his entire body rigid, ears perked forward. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. Caleb exhaled sharply, forcing himself to think. They needed to move. Now. If Briggs had sent someone, this wasn't a warning. It was a message. The house was no longer safe. The truck was their only chance. Caleb grabbed Rex's leash, but the dog didn't need it. He was already moving toward the door, his instincts kicking in. They stepped outside and Caleb felt it immediately, eyes on them. He kept his expression neutral, acting like he hadn't noticed the car, but his mind was racing. He walked toward the truck, his steps slow, measured. Rex stayed by his side, tense but controlled. Then, just as Caleb reached for the door handle, the car door opened. A man stepped out. Dark suit, no badge, no hesitation. A cop wouldn't have waited this long. This was a hit. Caleb didn't think. He grabbed Rex and shoved him into the truck. Before he could close the door, the man's voice rang out. "You don't want to do that." Caleb froze. Slowly, he turned around. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with cold, empty eyes. He wasn't here to talk. Caleb's heart pounded. "Who are you?" The man took a slow step forward. "Let's just say the chief doesn't like loose ends." A lump formed in Caleb's throat. "Briggs sent you." The man smirked. "It's nothing personal. Just return the dog and we'll forget this ever happened." Rex let out a deep, menacing growl from inside the truck. He knew. Caleb swallowed hard. He could play along, pretend he was willing to negotiate, but he knew the truth. Even if he gave Rex up, They wouldn't let him walk away. He had seen too much. Caleb clenched his fists. "And if I say no?" The man sighed, pulling something from his jacket. A gun. "Then I make this quick." Adrenaline shot through Caleb's veins. His entire body screamed to move. But he didn't have to. Because in the next second, Rex launched. The German Shepherd exploded out of the truck, fangs bared. All the pain and betrayal of the past week channeled into one single moment. The man barely had time to react. Rex hit him like a freight train, knocking the gun from his hand. He went down hard, yelling in shock as canine teeth clamped around his arm. Caleb didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing the gun and kicking it away. The man struggled, but Rex didn't let go. For the first time since this nightmare started, Rex was fighting back. Caleb grabbed the man's collar, pulling him up. "Listen to me," he hissed. "You tell Briggs we're coming for him. You tell him this isn't over." The man groaned, glaring. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Caleb yanked him closer. "Neither does he." Then, without another word, he shoved him to the ground. Rex released his grip, stepping back with a warning growl. The man gasped in pain, clutching his bleeding arm. Caleb grabbed Rex's collar and jumped into the truck. He slammed the door shut and started the engine. Tires screeched against the pavement as they sped away, leaving the man in the dirt. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Because now they were in this together. The final move. Caleb drove without stopping, without looking back. He didn't know where he was going, just away, but Rex knew. The dog sat in the passenger seat, his eyes locked on the road ahead. He had spent his whole life taking orders. Now, he was taking control. Caleb exhaled, gripping the wheel. "All right, buddy. We finished this." Rex's tail twitched. They weren't running anymore. They were hunting. 1 week later, the news broke fast. Police chief under investigation for corruption and murder cover-up. Caleb smirked as he watched the headlines roll in. The truth was out. The footage, the erased files, the witnesses, everything Briggs had tried to bury had finally come to light. He glanced at Rex, who lay stretched out on the couch, ears flicking at the sound of the news anchor's voice. They had done it. Briggs had been arrested. The department had been forced to acknowledge Rex's existence. But more than that, Rex was free. No more orders, no more cages, just a new life. Caleb smiled, reaching over to scratch behind Rex's ears. "You did good, partner," Rex huffed, nudging Caleb's hand. A small, simple moment, but one that meant everything. Because after everything they had been through, they had won. Together.